What's going on is Anton from AntonDaniels.com. I appreciate you guys for continuing to rock with me. I want to explore this whole situation about Jackson, Mississippi. And the reason why I want to explore this situation about Jackson, Mississippi is because obviously we're all aware of what's been happening in the news and things like that. But more importantly, there was a conversation that was happening on Fight Club last night. And there seems to be a mindset to where it's always somebody else's fault as to why things are the way that they are. And I listened to a couple of people that I would even consider experts. They work in different departments as far as wastewater treatment, water plants. I talked to an engineer. I even talked to a plumber just to get a lot of different views and perspectives on this. And one thing is for sure, two things is for certain, that this is not a problem that is only going to be visible in Jackson, Mississippi. I think that what we've seen happening in Flint, but what's happening in Jackson, Mississippi is going to be happening across the United States if we don't have a honest conversation about what's going on in our environment and in our economy, right? So let's deep dive into it for a little bit and let's have a conversation. So obviously this is a picture and the videos for what's happening in Jackson, Mississippi. And I actually anticipated going to visit Jackson, Mississippi recently, but I'm going to go ahead and put that trip on hold because clearly God said, not now, not yet. And so let's deep dive into it because the title of this video or the title of this article as presented by the Washington Post is Living in a City with No Water. This is unbearable. This reminds me of almost like a third world country, right? And so let's just go into the article and dig into it a little bit. It said, what stood out this week was the calm, streets were quiet, and the residents queued expectantly for resources. The entire city of more than 150,000 people was without safe drinking water and with no end in sight. Many residents here say they adapted long ago to catastrophic government failure. Jackson's water has been messed up. I don't even feel like they should be issuing people bills, said Rashonda Snell, 32, who works at the local hotel. It's infected and you can't do anything. Basically, you can't do nothing with it. Snell is the beneficiary of the Federal Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, for those of you that are not familiar, and says she has been using most of the money she receives from it to buy water from her family for a while. I spend about $200 on bottled water every month. That's mainly what I use that money for, to buy 5 big cases of water for the month. I really want to leave Jackson so bad. Now let's look at this. We're going to have an uncomfortable conversation right now. Y'all don't want to have this uncomfortable conversation, but we're going to have it. Let's look at this. Let's get this. So going back up, it says she is the beneficiary of the Federal Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. She's already on government assistance. Now, this is not to bash her specifically, but this is to highlight not just what's going on in Jackson, Mississippi as the problem, but also how do we solve for it? What is the solution? And you cannot sit here and tell me that a non-tax-paying citizen or a person that's actually benefiting on the behalf of taxpayers, right there, with her little girl right there, is not a part of the problem. We can pass all the laws we want. I know Biden had the infrastructure bill and the Build Back Better plan, and they were adding electric cars or whatever. Do I really need to have this conversation right now? She is the beneficiary of SNAP, and that she's saying that she's using the money to be able to buy water. Well, in order to be able to, and remember, I've had conversations with a lot of different people, in order to be able to solve for this issue, because again, we're passing a buck and we always gonna put it on government officials and things like that. But these are the very taxpayers, and if you got a city of 150,000 people, how can you fix a huge infrastructure problem when the people or the government officials are simply a reflection of the people that they represent? It's the voters or the lack thereof, because historically in these small towns, or not small towns, but historically in urban cities, the voter turnout rate or the people that you vote for, or, they keep on voting in these same people over and over again. instead of voting on the people that's best for the job. But how can somebody that is on the SNAP program actually have a say-so on what's best for the city? I hate to be the one to have this conversation, but let's continue. The water system in Jackson, Mississippi, capital, has been failing for years. In 2021, a harsh winter storm knocked out the system for a month. Even when water is flowing from the taps, residents struggle with intermittent boil water advisories and high bills for water that is not always safe to drink. This week, in part because of severe floods, the treatment plant failed completely. Even the city's residents without water to drink, bathe, or even flush toilets. Governor Tate Reeves declared Jackson's ongoing water crisis an immediate health threat. Experts say this crisis was years in the making, a result of inadequate funding for essential infrastructure upgrades. For the past year, leaders of the majority black, Democrat-led city have pushed for additional funding from white Republicans who run the state. Little has come from these appeals. Now, let's have this conversation really quickly. Let's have this conversation because somebody got to pay for it. You know, somebody on the panel last night said, Anton, I posed a scenario. I said, if somebody runs a business and somebody comes in and they steal shirts, who should have to pay for it? He said, somebody got to pay for it. Might as well be you, basically. And I'm like, interesting. So you don't want to force people to deal with their own problems because let's be clear, the states separate themselves from the federal government and the cities largely separate themselves from how different cities operate within a state. When we seen this during the pandemic, every state had the ability to be able to manage their own environment or their own little country, a country within a country, and make their own decisions. But then they want to beg for the federal government or the state at large in order to fix the infrastructure problem. Should people be left to their own devices in order to fix their own problems? You have a very low voter turnout rate. You have the top 5% of Americans paying for the majority of the taxes. And then the solution is always more taxes and a tax the rich more so that we can give out more government handouts to the people that don't pay or contribute to the tax burden or the infrastructure problem at large, but they take up the majority of the resources. It's a dilemma, and I'm not saying that I have the solution right off the bat, but I'm saying it is worth having a conversation about. Let's continue. On Thursday, state officials announced that 108 tractor trailers loaded with water was on their way to Jackson for all of the residents. Reeves deployed 600 Mississippi National Guard troops to 7 water distribution sites across the state capital. Government said at least one water treatment pump was expected to be repaired by early next week, although it was not clear when water service would be restored citywide. For many, it's too little too late. Kwame Braxton, 32, said, I haven't had proper water running for at least a year and a half. A visual artist. What the fuck is a visual artist that lives in West Jackson? You know, this reminds me of when you used to watch HGTV and they would be house hunters. Like, what do? I'm a flower pot plotter and I'm a visual artist. And what's your budget? $200 million. Braxton was home watching his niece and nephew. The Jackson Public School District announced Monday that it would shift to virtual learning until running water had been restored. Braxton, who owns a digital fabrication lab, stepped in to host his young relatives because he is able to work from home. What is it? What are these jobs? It's hard to work, but you do what you have to do for family. For over a year, Braxton has had trouble flushing one of his toilets, and water in the pipes has had brownish tint. Is this Jackson? Look at that background. Sheesh. During a freeze last year, the pipes in one of Braxton's house burst, flooding his front lawn and more than quadrupling his water bills. He said it took him more than 3 months of calling the city to get the technicians down to the property to shut off the valve so he can get a plumber in to make repairs. It's really just government mismanagement and a lack of caring about what happens in the inner city community. You go to these different communities outside of Jackson and you can see the difference. They will put funding towards fixing their infrastructure over there. Jackson's population has drastically changed. Since its peak in 1980 at about 200,000 people. Now, what did they say? At 150,000 people? They said the white people that was in Jackson back in 1980 versus today was over, 115, 110,000. Now they're at close to 20,000. And then the black people was at 120,000, but they was at less than 100,000. For Veronica Jackson, just getting the basics is like having a second job. who works in foster home licensing at the Mississippi Department of Human Services, has a tight schedule. After working all day, she volunteers with the football team on which her two boys, ages 6 and 14, play. You know, I don't know who you blame for this problem, honestly. I don't know if it's a shared blame, but I know that it's not just one person. I know it's just not one entity. I know you just don't blame the government. I think that we all need to take ownership and responsibility for how our infrastructure, how our cities, how we voted, who it is that we have in power, what we prioritize, and what we throwing our money towards. If you're not a contributing member to society, if you're not paying taxes, and you have the majority of people living underwater or in poverty, it's difficult for you to be able to make a case that people should continue to put resources into your communities. But then at the same time, we can't just let these people starve. That's the argument that's being made, right? And so I don't know what the solution is. So I'm just presenting this problem, and I'm highlighting the different conversations that's being had across the internet because I'm curious as to what you guys think. Do you think that we have a huge problem in which there is no real solution? We don't put money into infrastructure. We put more money into putting it in people's hands and forgiveness, and we continue to have a national deficit in which we're not using any of the money that we're continuing to occur this national deficit for into the things that really matter, which is an aging infrastructure. And instead, we're deploying more IRS agents to chase down the middle class and the rich people that actually is paying for the infrastructure and the things that's happening in our communities. I'm curious as to what y'all think. Let me know in the comments. You can reach out to me at AntonDaniels413@gmail.com if you're trying to get in touch with me for a Zoom call or a personal call, or if you need me to come out to your city or whatever like that. Hit me up. We can have a conversation about it, but make sure you join the Patreon. Link is in the description as well as pinned to the top of the chat so you don't be running in the Victim Olympics and you have the options to not be subjected to what's going on in society. Instead, you're doing the thing that's best for you. I love you. I appreciate you. I want to know what y'all think. I'm going to holler at y'all later. Peace.